Hello and welcome to the History of the Picts podcast, episode 2, Agricola. In today's episode we'll be going over what is a Pict, loosely, and then also what was before them. News to us,
So
it was everything.
yeah, this is kind of an endeavour I wish we'd never picked up, because I was doing my notes for this episode and I thought, oh yeah, we should cover what before the Picts sort of, because like all the other podcasts, like we mentioned in the intro, sort of do that. They get before and they run into
Yeah.
it, and then we've got a whole
Mistake.
episode on it. Yeah. So the Picts were people who lived in a large part of what is now Scotland, sort of the northeast, sort of, But as mentioned in the first episode, obviously they left no written records of themselves. We actually don't know what they referred to themselves as. But however, when I was reading Tim Clarkson's Picts, it was either that or The Picts and Scots at War by Nick Aitchison. That is what is the word for language, like epistemology, estemology, something like that.
I don't know.
Actually, it's basically it's not what the Romans called them. It's a local word. I think it translates into painted people, but it's actually from Britain.
Yeah,
so
well, I think from what I've
call
read,
themselves Picts.
yeah, from what I've read, I think the Britain is like, well, they're all Britons, but like the other Britain groups called them that.
Yeah, it's
and-
not actually a Roman.
Yeah. The
sort of
Picts may
label.
have adopted it, like how the Britons adopted
Yeah,
the word Britons,
yeah,
but we
because-
don't know.
Because like Bede and stuff still refer to them as the Picts, and he doesn't go with anything else. So it's sort of, I think the running theory is that they get called it and sort of wear it. But I would
Yeah.
imagine if there was another alternative name, because obviously Bede is living in the time of the Picts, so
And
we're
we'll-
sort of jumping ahead there.
And you'll learn, and you'll learn more about the Picts in the Christianity kind of episodes. We might focus just
Yeah.
on the beat. Well, because narrative focus, we might need to jump about a little bit. Not really,
Yeah.
but some episodes
sort
might
of
just be
provide
on Columba.
context.
Yeah, well, like Columba and
Yeah.
Bede, we'll have to discuss a lot of what they do outside of the Pict stuff. But we might do an episode just on them because they're really important for.
Yeah, but that's, I
Scottish
mean,
history,
like
yeah.
half of it is like that is rise on their work. So
Yeah, yeah.
But they were obviously Britain themselves, and they were influential enough for the Romans to separate them from the other Britons at large, which, if you know, the Romans was an impressive feat because they loved nothing more than banding people together. Like, one of the other large tribes is the Caledonians, but, like, I'm pretty sure the Caledonians were, like, 3 different people.
Yeah, it was like a confederation, and we're still jumping ahead.
Yeah. But they're first documented in the 3rd century AD when their raids into the Roman Empire started to genuinely cause problem for the Roman authorities.
Yeah, which is also quite impressive. Since this podcast is narrative focused, we'll be discussing today, everything before the Picts and the Picts themselves. I've said that already. Before the Picts were first recorded in history, their territory of what is now in Scotland was inhabited by an earlier people, the ancestors of the Picts, and these were the first peoples to be encountered by the Roman armies. Their society was a typical, run-of-the-mill Iron Age society of farmers, fishermen and tradesmen, grouped into tribes and ruled by a landowning aristocracy with a well-organised community of hierarchical structures.
They would have actually spoke Brittonic dialect, which we only know because, and I swear this is like the last time we'll jump ahead, because I say we only know, I'm sure there's other external sources for it, but Columba has to get a translator, and he spoke Gaelic. I hope I'm using or Irish. I really don't
Gaelic.
care for whatever's he spoke that, so the fact he needed a translator sort of says for what they spoke there. And most of the population would live in small settlements, one of the local chiefs who were in charge, who were sworn to greater chiefs or kings. So sort of think of, I can't believe I keep going back to Ireland. The best example is sort of king. You have little kingdoms, and then you have the High King in Ireland. Is a good way of thinking of it. Or Monmouths. There you go. You've got Monmouths for the district.
I like the whole Roman Empire, just like confusing.
The economy would be livestock, cows, pigs, sheep, and the societies would be built wooden, wheat and barley. An average person would have lived in wooden houses, stone if you were lucky, and the nobility would have been fortified homes and strategic locations like a hilltop. Some rich lords would have had stone towers called brocks, and the people would have been surrounded by the small houses of the people there. And I would like to throw in that an example of one of these is, I think it's Aberfeldy or Aberfindi or something like that, up in the northeast of Scotland.
Yeah. I also like to add, see, the Highlands nowadays, it's still the same.
Yeah, it's incredible. There's no roads. When I was going to Glencoe, we had to get off at Dumbarton. The rest of it was horse and carriage.
Do you leave that in?
Yeah, we've got it.
We've lost all our like Highland audience. If they have phones, that is their internet connection.
Yep. Oh wow.
Right, okay. When the Romans first, hit their raids into Britain, it was in the 54 BC by Julius Caesar. So these stone towers were still the norm. To quickly sum up the invasion of Britain, the Gauls in the Gallic War got aid from the Britons, like the southern Britons, not all the Britons, and Caesar had a really weak Cassius Belli, so he invaded for... It's Julius Caesar, that's what he does.
Basically.
He was largely unsuccessful at consolidating his holdings, but he had more pressing matters to attend to, like the Senate, so he had to leave the swamp-hiding Britons to themselves. Conquest was considered by Augustus and was postponed by the comically evil Emperor Caligula, but it was commenced in 43 AD under the reign of Emperor Claudius with a full-scale invasion from Roman Gaul. The initial assault was followed by campaigns against the southern tribes. Some submitted almost instantly, but within 30 years, the ones who did fight anyway were defeated and consolidated into the Roman yoke.
Yes, and it's sort of the typical old Roman story from there. They conquer and consolidate, and there is a volatile frontier, there's a large garrison, the typical Roman province, and it needed a stable and experienced hand because of how volatile it was. Oh Lord, okay. Gaius, Julius...
It's Gaius. It's Gaius.
Gaius? Wow.
Gaius, yeah.
Okay. Gaius, I'm going to do the gimmick. Gnaeus Julius Agricola was appointed to the governorship in 78 AD. Agricola is a career soldier up to this point who had already served in Britain as commander of the 20th Legion, and it distinguished itself. And when Agricola arrives, he immediately had to subdue rebellious tribes in Wales. If you look at the recent local elections, that's still going on. And the Pennines, which is in northern England, and they're a famous problem for the English forever and ever. And we have a great contemporary account of Agricola because of his daughter married a historian, his son-in-law, Tacitus. I can't get away from this guy. The account was called Agricola, which is not a very creative, and it was made in 1980. Yes, we thought we'd take our inspiration of this lack of creativity and just name it after Agricola.
I wish we could go more detail about the Welsh Rebellion because it was really interesting. But I don't want to say anything in case I'm wrong, but I remember the Welsh kind of rebels sat on an island at one point, like the remnants, and they just waited them out. Mona just waited them out. Yeah.
The Romans have that problem when they first get there as well. I can't believe they didn't throw that in there.
Yeah. Tim Clark's never said it.
Mate, listen, Lord Emperor never mentioned it.
Yeah.
It's not important.
So Tacitus, how you say I'm saying how I want.
Tacitus, I think it is.
Tacitus focused a lot of detail on the north, which he quoted as describing the natives as having reddish hair and rather large limbs, which is the stereotypical barbarian. But, like all barbarians, they were a proud and fierce people, and that wasn't really anything new to the Romans, just enough people to become future Roman to them. That's how they seen them.
And to Agricola, they were just a nuisance to be swept aside. But he had to deal with the British tribes between the Pennines, I can't remember.
The Pennines,
Clydismus. In 80 AD is during the third year of his governorship, he marches north into the lowlands of modern-day Scotland, the only part of Scotland with people in it, and goes to war with the local tribes. They offered little resistance, and they were subjugated so quickly, in fact, that the Romans were able to spend some time building forts in the new districts of Roman Britain. That doesn't say much after that sort of comment. Apologies to my fellow Scots in the Highlands. But we'll not get to me in their horse and carriage, so I'll get away with it.
They're like actually Scots.
Before the end of the summer. Yeah, they actually are. That's a good bit. But before the end of the summer, Agricola's march had brought him to the southern edge of the Highlands. With this, he crossed the River Forth and entered the unknown Highlands. The Romans soon found themselves in typical Scottish weather of... it seems here that script has sunshine and rainbows. I think that's meant to be wind and rain. Slowed the Roman advance, but in typical Roman fashion, because they had they had probably the best soldiers in the known world before someone comes at me with actually the whatever dynasty in China had the best Roman. Shut up, okay?
The best soldiers, yeah.
This is soldiers of the history of Rome here, okay?
Yeah.
But they pressed on, and the native communities can do much because of the professionalism.
And
The
also
Roman
the
armies didn't
overwhelming
sit
army.
back. Yeah, but he went into. Probably should have started, but he went in here with 3 legions and over 25,000 men, or
No,
roughly
that
there.
was no,
And
no, no, no. That was a different. That's a
Is that
head. Stop skipping
it's
ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Oh man. Spoiler. 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 And the native communities couldn't do much anyway, and as the Roman armies plunder their way on to hit the Tay, and that stops Agricola in his tracks.
Yeah, well, but he instead retreated to the Forth to consolidate his holdings. He spent the next few years installing garrisons of auxiliaries, which would have been maybe even native Britons in the area. The following year, 82 AD, saw him campaigning near Solway or Firth in unconquered lands west of Annandale. Their capitulation led Agricola to the shores of the Irish Sea, where he briefly fought about sending men to Ireland, with him believing it would take only 1 legion and a few units of auxiliaries. But the Highlands were more pressing issue and needed more to be focused on more. If they did conquer Ireland, I'd be more. I don't know. We'll not get into all the history here, but it'd be more interesting for the fall of Roman Britain. With all land below the Forth Clyde Isthmus in Roman hands, he knew the men of the north represented a much bigger threat than Ireland or Isle of Man. So in 83 AD, he marched north again with an army of 25,000 men. The 3 legions he brought with him were the 2nd, infamous 9th, and the 20th Legion, which was his core fighters, with the rest being auxiliaries, which had about several thousand heavy cavalry.
After this, a fleet was organised to make detailed reconnaissance of the coast and to keep the army supplied. This is literally the English trope for invasions. Wow, oh my, this is so... Wow. On these ships were tough marines who were also professional, I believe, and there was a bit of a competition between them and the
army,
legionaries, which still goes on today. And sometimes these would raid the natives who happened to be unlucky enough to live at the coast. Eventually, the Roman army reached the River Tay and crossed it and entered a region called Caledonia. And they were almost immediately thrust upon by the natives, who were called by Tacitus as Britons. And I quote, they were a tribal confederation whose coal lands were between the Firths of Tay and Moray. Moray, is that right? Yeah. Proof of this with the names Dunkeld, the fort of the Caledonians, Rohalion, probably, the Wrath of the Caledonians, and Galeon, Fairy Hill of the Caledonians.
Yeah,
spoiler, Fairy Hill of the Caledonians.
Yeah.
Spoiler.
So see, for the theories about the Picts, I'm putting that in. That must be one of them. Yeah.
Unlike the other Britons, the Caledonians did not sit idly and allow the legionaries to overpower them and overwhelm them. and they launched devastating raids on the forts and camps established by Agricola in the wake of his advance, using hit and run tactics. So, more Scottish history that just goes on for about another 1,000 years. And these raids were so devastating that they caused some Roman officers to advise a strategic withdrawal. But in typical Roman fashion, these ideas were stomped down on when Agricola learned that the Caledonians were planning a full assault on his column and decided to squash it by splitting his army into 3 columns, which is not typically a very sound idea, but...
Against guerrilla warfare, yes. This made the Caledonians to look at other options and change their plans by, instead of launching a night attack, their target was the 9th Legion. And as the 9th Legion were sleeping in their camps, the Caledonians set upon them. Brutal fighting went underway, but the Caledonians were held back for far too long, and Agricola was able to relieve the 9th Legion and attack the rear Caledonians, which caused a double encirclement inside the camp. This caused a rout, obviously, with the survivors disappearing into the wilderness. Now, I'm not too sure if this would be like the myth of the 9th Legion disappears. I don't think it is.
The 9th Legion are not long after, I think.
Yeah, but like, it's not mentioned at all, like any book I read, so I think it's not important to mention, because we can maybe do an episode on it. There's like a schizo.
Yeah, I suppose we'll...
May as well.
Try not to make too much of a history of Scotland, but we'll be here.
Yeah. This defeat to the Caledonians made them adopt a more aggressive mindset, and began to muster their forces, which was what Agricola wanted. It's what any Roman officer wants against barbarian hordes, for them to organise and do a pitched battle. It's unclear why the Caledonians actually abandoned their sound strategy, but maybe the leaders thought they had the upper hand with the larger forces. But by the following summer, a huge native army was ready to meet the Romans in open battle, which, if you know your history, it's not a good thing to do.
No, not particularly against the Romans, especially in this period. And anyway, Tacitus speaks of tribes foraging treaties. Foraging? Wow. Forging. Wow. How did I get foraging? Forging treaties with each other to unite against a common the common enemy, which sounds nice and good for reading, and that's why it's probably unrealistic. And they probably rallied behind, sort of a core central leader, who's probably a king or a chieftain of a particularly powerful tribe, who could persuade or force everybody to fight together, these other tribes and chieftains. And Tacitus named them as his leader Calgacus, but he probably didn't exist. But that's a separate issue. The Romans love just sort of making shit up and assuming. Although I suppose every now and then one of them turns out to be real. Anyway, Tacitus speaks of the native warriors flocking to the colours, which is something the Caledonians didn't do, since they never had a regimental system of professional soldiers with their own colour or standard, and the clash between the armies occurred in late August or early September at Mons Grappus. The location of the battle is unknown, but some strong contenders exist. And I would like to add about the Battle of Mons Grampus, I'm sure this is actually a scribal error, and it's maybe something like Mons Grampus or Graupus, something like that. I'm not sure if yours is the right spelling or not, but it's actually a medieval scribal error.
Yeah, I want to also add, the Caledonians didn't wear armour, so this flocking to the colours.
The thing is, as the Britons are first recorded as using woad in 5048 BC, but this is because of this is in Caesar's account. And the Bridgeon's distance slab? Have I really wrote it as distance slab? That can't be right. But the Bridgeness distance slab has native warriors depicted as naked, and this dates to about roughly 142 AD. But we don't know why. And the Caledoni and the Meate, according to Herodian, fought naked and painted, apparently, and they were only protected by a narrow shield and spear with a sword slung from their naked bodies. But again, this is a trope of being barbaric.
Yeah.
So whether or not they actually did is, but there's so many accounts of it happening.
But from what we do see from the Picts, the Picts and Scots never wore armour, didn't they? Not in battle. They never used cavalry.
Not until later.
They didn't really use archers, cavalry, or armour until but before someone did do it. Yeah.
Not until the Romans leave Britain. Anyway.
Yeah, but it's some of the big. Listen, this is really far ahead, but as a Pictish battle between English army, and they didn't wear. No side brought cavalry or archers. They just meat-walled each other. It's quite impressive for the time, because they should have done that. But according to Tacitus, 8,000 allied auxiliary infantry formed the centre, while 3,000 cavalry were on the flanks, with the Roman legions as a reserve in the front of their camps. Estimates for the size of the Roman army range from 17,000 to 30,000, although Tacitus says it was 11,000 auxiliaries were engaged, along with a further 4 squadrons of cavalry. The number of these legions are uncertain, and reserves uncertain. The Caledonian army, which Tacitus claims was led by Calgacus, but only mentions him giving a speech, was said to be around 30,000 strong. It was stationed mostly on higher ground. Its front ranks were on the level ground, but the other ranks rose in tiers up the slopes of the hill in a horseshoe formation. Hope I'm explaining this any kind of good. The Caledonians had chariots, which is so outdated. They're in the Old Testament. It's and they charged the chariots charged in the level plain between the two armies. After the brief exchange of missiles, Agricola ordered the auxiliaries to launch a frontal assault on the enemy, and these were based on 4 cohorts of Batavians and 2 cohorts of Tungri swordsmen. The Caledonians were cut down and trampled on the slopes of the hill. Those at the top attempted an outflanking movement, but they were also themselves outflanked by the Roman cavalry before they could do any proper damage. The Caledonians were then comprehensively routed and fled for shelter in the woodlands, but they were relentlessly pursued by the Roman organisation, by the well-organised Roman units. And it's also mentioned that Agricola had to like go out his way to bring them back because the Romans were chasing them far too long, and it was causing like a proper issue where they just kept chasing them. The army would have been like eventually just destroyed.
This is sort of my favourite part of the Roman invasion of Britain, is you constantly encounter these chariots, and the Romans are like, what is going on? Like, it really is a bit of a land before time. I mean, could you imagine it? You're at the slopes of Mount Grampus, you're some random Tungry swordsman or a Batavian horseman who's been, the Batavians have been a part of the Roman army for a little while now.
Yeah, it's like heavy cavalry.
And you see
like
chariots. You see chariots, and you're like, no, there's no way.
Yeah, because like
these guys, and they're charging at you. You can imagine the thunder of these literally ancient,
And I don't know about anyone else, but I don't see like I can't comprehend a chariots are like a good like offensive weapon. I can't gauge it.
To any of the older viewers, I say this, I'm not too old myself, but on Rome Total War, you did not go toe to toe with chariots. They got that pretty wrong in Rome Total War. See, in Rome Total War, if you had cavalry and chariots, your cavalry were getting dog walked. Your cavalry was dog walked. So maybe
a Caledonian actually made that game.
Maybe played a bit too much Rome Total War.
Yeah, but it's still interesting too because I'd assume the chariots that are used in like the races at this time in Rome were probably better than like the actual like,
maybe.
Yeah,
although I suppose the chariots in Rome wouldn't have been used for combat, so
yeah, like it's so strange because like they were used for sport in Rome, and then here's like as weapons.
Yeah,
like the great weapon.
Great, but returning to the account of the battle, it's said that the Roman legions took no part in the battle, being held in reserve. According to Tacitus, 10,000 Caledonian people died at a cost of only 360 auxiliary troops, and 20,000 Caledonians retreated into the woods, where they fared considerably better against the pursuing forces, and the Roman scouts were unable to locate the remaining Caledonian forces the next morning, which I think it's incredible. This is like sort of typical of like later medieval accounts, where you have like a Turkish battle, and the Turk sources are recorded as 3 men and the Sultan defeating 3 quintillion Romans, and they suffered no casualties and actually gained a troop, like that famous story of the Luxembourg troop.
It's funny to say, but that's like literally everything like. Yeah. Even like Barber did this as well with Robert the Bruce. Like,
yeah, it's great. But Mons Grappius was a decisive victory for the Romans. There's no two ways about it, and it brought the whole of Britain, well, most of Britain, into the Agricola's grasp. However, this battle wasn't as decisive as he believed, with 2/3 of the Caledonian army surviving, which, to be fair, it's still horrific losses to lose a third of your army.
Yeah, it's like on average like 10%. It's like 20% is like considered bad. Or is it 10% considered bad? Got it. It's like 10% considered like a heavy defeat or victory.
I think yeah, I suppose so. Because I mean, casualties are wounded and walking wounded, and then you get the death from it. But I think 10-20% are not good losses to concede. Although it's all relative to the context. Anyway, consolidating this mess of the Highlands would be too costly for too little reward for Agricola, and his officers knew it. The Romans about-faced and marched back to safer lands, with some hostages taken from the Beresti peoples, leaving some men to garrison the glens of Persia. Also, with this, the Romans are going to Roman, and Emperor Domitian called Agricola back to Rome out of jealousy and fear of this victory, which I totally understand. A Roman officer could win a skirmish against 30 raiders and would be hailed Emperor.
Yeah, it is mental because like you listen to it, and no offense to Mick Duncan or like Robin Pearson, but they get really confused, like they understand why they're getting called back, but they go like they just should have left them there. But when you read like the Christ of the 1st century, it was just one battle, and it's I'm now God Emperor of the Roman Empire. Yeah. And if I was Domitian, I would do the exact same thing.
Oh yeah. I mean the year, I can't remember exactly the years in which Vespasian. It was like the year of the 4 emperors, and I mean Vespasian becomes emperor because he's doing his own thing and he has, he's pretty competent and he's got a good career up to now and he's won a few battles and these legionaries are just like, yeah, this guy's god emperor of the universe now, and Vespasian just happens to be competent enough to actually turn out to be god emperor of the universe for the Romans.
Yeah, and
it's like I totally get it from the mission.
Yeah, but
It's
Roman
like, okay,
emperors.
done what you need to. You've got to go.
Yeah, but for Roman emperors, it's not like even if you're a good emperor, it doesn't matter. I get mixed up Aurelian and it's Marcus Aurelian and Marcus Marcus Augustus. I can't. No, it's not. It's Aurelian. It's the one that
Aurelian
reunited,
is
the one that reunited all
is
Roman.
like,
It's not Aurelian.
he's Resteta Orbis, I think, which is world restorer. Or something
Yeah, so
like
the
that.
one I get between Aurelian and the other one, it's the one that unified Rome after the whole the world restorer.
Yeah.
He got assassinated for no reason because
Yeah.
from what I can remember, it was a secretary lied to the commanders and said, yeah, he's gonna kill you all. So the commanders had to
Yeah.
kill him before they killed him, and then see when they found out.
Yeah.
This secretary got the most brutal death imaginable. It's because like if that emperor wasn't assassinated, the Roman emperor would been totally different because he like
Yeah, I mean,
but
he
he
I
put
mean,
like
what? He's literally his name is Restorer of. He gets honoured with the title Restorer of the World.
see in this podcast, if you go on a tangent, don't regard it as history. Like just nod your head.
nah.
Nod your head. Press the skip button
Yeah,
until
no,
you get back to the
hear
narrative.
it, yeah.
Because it helps. Because even though it's wrong, it's not. There's no point about Aurelian getting stabbed. It's like. Yeah, it's okay. We're moving
good nuggets in there.
on. We're moving on. So it was like a 5-minute waste of time there.
Totally.
With the Caledonians remaining unconquered, the fleet that was shadowing the army just circumnavigated the island of Britain, and they figured out that it was an island, which they never knew by this point. And all they did was like just intimidate the natives because they had to withdraw. They just sailed around intimidating people, but they got a lot of data on the north, the tribes of the north, and this map was drawn by Ptolemy. I
think it's Ptolemy, and Ptolemy does his sort of. Ptolemy does he's 3rd century BC.
Yeah.
I think I might be wrong.
Wait a minute. But first century before Christ. It's Ptolemy.
So. No, because Ptolemy's like the early Greek explorer. Yeah, he's BC. I think. Hold on. I might be totally wrong here.
It was like no, but it could be it's the same. It was Ptolemy. It was like Ptolemy, a Greek cartographer.
No, you're totally right. You're totally right.
Identifying the tribes of
earlier Greek explorer.
Identifying the tribes of Britain and Ireland, which the Boresti just aren't in it. So it could.
Yep.
It brings up the fact maybe like you attack this misnamed someone, or they just made it up to like make it seem like a victory.
Or maybe like Ptolemy's got like beef.
Yeah,
like a Beresti moneylender, like he owed money to one of them, so he just thought, you're getting left at the map.
Yeah.
But the map places the Caledoni.
Wait, pause. Can we count this as like historic, like anything other than just a comedy podcast at this point? Because it's yes, we're doing history, but we keep.
Okay, we can pause. We can pause from the map drawing, and then we'll restart now. So go back and read the map.
No, we're leaving it in. It's the first episode.
Okay,
no, but I wanted to say this earlier on about like we got to like the pen eyes and we started laughing for like 5 minutes of the pen eyes. Yeah, if you come to this podcast for like a academic learning, it is helpful, but it's not like you wouldn't base your thesis on this podcast, would you?
No, I'd put this sort of like on par with a
horrible history
of like horrible history and like the rest is history podcast, because it's very light-hearted in that sense. Like, in the same vein, I'm not claiming we are as reliable as Tom Holland and Dominic Sambrook. They are terrific historians and authors in their own right, and are a bit more qualified to talk about what they talk about.
Yeah.
But I would definitely put it more in the vein if I would not be quoting your Lugs and Look podcast to you.
We're just two Strathclyde Britons.
Two Strathclyde Britons with a dream. But anyway, Ptolemy's map. places the Caledonia across the Central Highlands in the territory of a people called Vacomagi, something like that, who seem to hold Moray in the Spey Valley. Aberdeenshire is shown lying within the lands of the. Oh, you stitch me up here. Of the Tazeli? That sounds so South American. Tazeli, I don't know. Well, Fife appears to be the home of the Venicones.
And also, bear in mind, these aren't what they call themselves. It may be like some
May
variation.
have been, may not have
been. I know as much as the historians do in this sense, which isn't a good thing. Within a decade of Agricola's withdrawal, the Romans became rather pessimistic about the idea of conquering the rest of Scotland, or the Highlands, because this wasn't a thing yet. The forts of Perthshire were abandoning removing any infrastructure for any future campaigns, and it kind of
remains that way to this day.
Yes, and it kind of reminds me of like Germany, Germania, of like after the battle, the Timber Forest. Sorry. I was going to call it Tietenburg, but
Tietenburg. I should have let you. I should have let you go. Yeah, the Battle of Tietenburg Forest, and just left that to hang there.
Oh, I'm sorry, guys.
Anyway, a Roman fort named. Oh man, we should really get like a Gaelic speaker on for this one. Inch Chula or something like that.
No, but it was a Roman fort called this, so it'd been Latin. Get Pope
Latin at all.
Get the Pope on this.
Oh, there you go. Half of your ship gone. Well done. There's another half gone. On the north bank of the Tay was demolished before it was even finished, and the Romans shrunk back to the rivers estuary and is marked by a line of wooden watchtowers.
It was forts too, but I didn't feel like I forgot to add that. Sorry, I forgot to this. It was small forts too.
Yeah, small forts, and these were also abandoned by 90 AD. The Scottish lowland garrisons were lingering on for another 10 years, but the dawn of the 2nd century required a little urgent need of manpower due to the Danube, as ever, which led Britain a little strapped for manpower, causing the frontier to shrink back even further to the Tyne Solway
Isthmus.
Fuck off.
The early years of the 2nd century saw many barbarian raids into Roman Britain. No mention of the Caledonians or who it was made, but they were still devastating nonetheless, and it caused Emperor Hadrian, who Arteta would have loved, to order a great stone wall to be built. I'm just going to get that joke. Built across
Sorry, take me a minute.
Built across the Tyne Solway frontier. This work began in 122 or 123 AD and was still in progress when Hadrian's successor, Antoninus Pius, launched campaigns north to reconquer the lost Roman lands. And Roman authority was re-established and a new barrier was built, but not of stone, but of turf. That was length of 40 miles with a garrison 6,000 men to operate it. Several Agricolan forts and some new ones north of the line were maintained as forward outposts, while the wall was impressive and large garrisons manned it. It was more a display of prestige, really, for the emperor rather than any practical defence. And this wall made Hadrian's Wall redundant, but not for long, because it was abandoned in the 150s with the Roman soldiers moving south to quell a revolt among the Brigantes of the Pennies before permanently evacuating in the following decade. A handful of forts beyond the Forth were still garrisoned, but the imperial boundary shrank back to Hadrian's Wall.
Between the 180s and 184s, well, that was, you could have said 180 and 184s.
Yeah, but skip 30 years.
Beheaded. So time jump. The wall was overwhelmed. The fighting was brief, but it was a costly PR disaster for the Romans, and the Romans retook the wall, but all forts north of the wall were totally abandoned. And that disaster is where we will want to end today's podcast, to not overload you with such trembling historical authority. Yeah. We will catch you all next week. Yep. You got to remember to rate that 5 stars, and if you're on YouTube,
Spotify,
a like and a comment.
It's kind of funny because the whole overload of information, it's even better that I did that because we spoke so much random stuff. Like, I feel bad if like if you try to listen to that because obviously you can still get through it without the ramblings, but it's
we should timestamp it.
We should
get started rambling.
We should do like a drinking one. See bad it gets. But yeah, that is the end of the first episode. Now, already we're planning to skip some weeks because we're planning on uploading it every Friday. I think is the plan. Apart from the introduction, which is gonna be maybe Thursday. Well, today as we're recording this, depends if I do it in time. However, next week I'm on holiday to Tenerife. So next week a normal episode will come out, and that will be on the actual picks. Then after that, we don't know. It could be 2 weeks for the next episode.
It's a free for all. It's a free for all.
So we're probably gonna do like the. But it feels out of place to do the fees of the picks. Like
we should we can work that out.
The Ninth Legion. We could do the Ninth Legion. Yeah, we could do the Ninth Legion. That's smart. Yeah, there we go. Because I was thinking to myself, we can't really do an episode about the picks and when they disappeared. But like one episode after covering who the picks actually were.
Yeah.
It's
that would be a messy timeline.
But yeah, if you've got any questions for us about the picks or history or just any question
today.
we will be doing I don't know, I haven't asked them yet, but we'll to pad this out, we may do some questions episodes, like if you've got enough like copy and
basically put it towards the end of an episode, you could
end of an era. We went through 3 eras for this episode. What do you mean end of an era? Yeah. We went from 43 BC to 180 AD.
This is a history of the Picts. This isn't a history of everything until the Picts.
Because sorry everyone, but see this. If you think that's a bad time skip, just you wait till we get to the Strathclyde Britons. Oh, well. Just you wait till we get to the Strathclyde Britons. The Picts are a bit. Even though nothing's wrong about them, the fact that we're so elusive probably helped that fact when more was written about them. But no one really cares about the Strathclyde Britons, which is kind of sad to say, because me, the true Briton, DNA based at Argyle, me, the true Briton, it's my people are gone.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is a 40-minute episode, and we've did the outro like 3 minutes ago. But yeah, if you enjoy that episode, I don't know how, please rate us 5 stars on Spotify, and if you're on YouTube, please. Maybe 2 5 stars to be me and him. And if you're on YouTube, please leave a like and a comment. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next Friday, hopefully. Wait. Okay. Also, the sources for this episode was the Makers of Scotland, Tim Clarkson, and the Picts, Tim Clarkson, and also the Scots and Picts at War by Nick Aitchinson. Aitchinson? You said it. I don't know how to say his name. Aitchinson, yeah, okay. And ChatGPT. So I'm getting on. Right, goodbye everyone.
Bye for now.